Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to Face to Face. Our guest this week is performer, composer, activist, and musicologist Jeremy Dutcher. Jeremy is a member of Tobique First Nation in New Brunswick. He released his debut album in 2018 to widespread praise. Jeremy went on to win the a category he would speak out against. Jeremy has also been vocal on the political front and on LGBTQ2S+ rights. Jeremy, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here to Face to Face. How would you describe the past year for yourself?
This year's been very, very intense. I sort of went from, just sort of working in my studio at my piano on my very first record, and then putting that into the world and having it received in a really beautiful way. You know, people have really received that offering in a way that I didn't anticipate, and so that's kept me very busy. Been going around touring for the last year, not just in Canada, but all over. So it's been amazing. I've gotten to work with some of my, idols, some people that I really, really admire in music. So I mean, it's really been a whirlwind and so wonderful. Obviously, I don't think anybody does it for the attention or for the awards. But it's a nice perk when people listen, because I always try to remember that just one generation ago, what I'm doing is not possible. Right. Releasing music all in an Indigenous language and having it win awards and be received, being played on the radio. This is something that I talk a lot with my mother about, and she says, I couldn't have imagined this. And so for me, I have to sit in that space and be grateful and have gratitude, but also, mark it with a real sense of joy. Just because I love what I'm doing right now. This is so exciting that I get to go around and sing these songs.
Well, and I love the album, and as you can tell walking in here, there's many fans. But I also find the backstory pretty fascinating. And for those who don't know, maybe you can tell us how this album really came to be.
Sure, yeah. So it really all began about a little over 5 years ago. And I had just graduated music school. I went to school to be an opera singer, but I was really looking for ways to express my identity as an Indigenous person through that way of making music. I come from the Wolastoqiyik people. We're in the East Coast, neighboring the Mi'kmaq Nation, and so I really wanted to express my language and my culture through that kind of music. And so it took me on this path, and with a little help from an elder of mine named Maggie Paul, who suggested that I go to the museum and work with these old wax cylinder recordings and bring them back to the people. So that's really what this work was about. It was going into the museum, seeing what was beautiful in there, which is this anthropologist who went and he collected over 100 of our traditional songs in 1907. So over 110 years ago, he collected, and he was taking photographs, he was trying to learn our language, all of these things, and just dumped it in the archive, And since then, it's sort of been dormant, right? Like not a lot of people, like even myself growing up, didn't know that this existed. So for me, it was about taking that out and making sure that people, like young Wolastoqiyik people, know that it exists, And I did that through music. But it's just one avenue, There's so many different ways that we can inspire young people to dig into their culture.
You must have known the language, I guess, beforehand if you were there transcribing, but what did you learn about the Wolastoqiyik language while doing this?
Oh my God, I mean, I think I've really been on a journey with this language in the last, my whole life, I should say. But even in the last couple of years, it's been a deepening and a strengthening of my language skills. And I learn something new every day in my language. And for me, the biggest, I guess, lesson when I started to dig really deep into it was the importance of relationality. and understanding that we are merely part of a web and a continuum. And so just it really allowed me to plug into my community in a way that I hadn't been able to before. And so I honor that language. And I was very fortunate to hear it growing up all the time, because my mother spoke, and I had lots of people around me speaking that language. But to go deeper and to understand it from a structural level, and to really dig into the work that it takes to revitalize a language. This is a lot of work, but it's stuff that I do gladly. We're in a very precarious point right now with our language. So, in my mother's generation, it was the language of every day. You go to the store, you would, order your stuff in the language. Now we have less than 100 fluent speakers left. So what happened there? What is that? What's that story? And how do we turn it around? And it's the people of this generation that are sort of looking at what we don't have and saying, no, this is not good enough to pass on. We need to do the work. And it's this generation that will do the work.
So the album blows up, you get shortlisted and win the 2018 Polaris Prize, one of the most prestigious music awards, if not the most prestigious in the country. Was that pretty surreal for you? Like you say, you don't go and doing this work thinking, oh, how many awards is this going to rack
Stack
up
those trophies up, Dennis.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely not that. I think for me it was, it's an honor to be to have all that hard work acknowledged, right? And acknowledged not from an industry standpoint, but that award, that Polaris Award, is chosen by music journalists, people that are eating, sleeping, breathing music, and so really understand the nuts and bolts of it. So the fact that and this is, over 200 journalists from across the country vote, and this one ended up on top, an album in an Indigenous language. And I wasn't even the only Indigenous nominee that year or this year,
right?
Yeah. And so I think what we need to state in this moment right now is that Indigenous music is not niche. It is music that really is speaking to what needs to be said in this country right now. I think about the Snotty Nose Res Kids and what they're saying on their records. People like Alyssa P. and what she's been saying in her music. And those were 2 Polaris nominees this year as well. And so it's really exciting to see that, it wasn't just a one-off. That our narratives, our stories, and our songs continue to be at the highest caliber in this country. So I have a lot of excitement for the health of the Indigenous music industry here. Because when I look out, I see a lot of really interesting creators and people that are speaking to something right now, which is exciting.
Yep, Buffy St. Marie's a past winner of the Polaris Prize, Tanya Tagak.
Come on, what a cohort to be a part of.
But what does that say where things are at in terms of Indigenous artists being recognized today in the industry?
Well, I think we have to be careful when we talk about recognition also as the means, the end goal, right? Like I think for our artists, we're all storytellers. Right? We just want to go and tell stories. So yeah, I think people are listening in a different way. The mainstream public, maybe the music industry is listening in a different way. But we've always been telling these stories, and we've always been speaking truth to power, and that hasn't changed. It's simply the fact that people are getting hot to it now. They're turning on to it, and I think that's really good. But from an artist standpoint, I don't think it changes anything. We're still creating, we're still here speaking from our centrality and saying that this is who we are.
You also took home the 2019 Juno Award for Indigenous Music Album of the Year, a category that you spoke out about, saying that we shouldn't, Indigenous artists should be recognized outside of the category. What can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, I think it's pretty self-apparent, right? Like I just think that the fact that there weren't any Indigenous artists nominated outside of that category is rather telling, and not accurate to how I, as a music lover and listener, when I look at the landscape of Canadian music, there's an incongruency there for me. So, I will say that representation is very important, and we needed that space there at the Junos. Do you know until 1995 that didn't even exist, that category, and so it was people like Buffy St. Marie and Elaine Bomberry who advocated to even be included. But we need to go further. It's not just about siloing Indigenous artists off into their own little category. It's about understanding that our music is of value and that we are offering something very important right now. So I just hoped in speaking to that category was to challenge people. And it was, I don't know if you saw that article, but they're making changes about it.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, they have announced a change. It kind of seems like maybe it's a different name to the category again, but are you happy with the change?
I wonder, am I happy with the change? I mean, we'll see how it bears out. I'm not going to make a determination on it one way or the other when I haven't even seen how it's going to, like who's nominated in the category, or like if there's Indigenous nominees outside of that category. Yeah. We shall see, I don't know. What I will say is it seems like they're listening, and so I'll keep talking.
Well, we're going to talk about some other things you were talking about at the Junos when we come back, but we've got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. This week is award-winning artist Jeremy Dutcher, and that was a bit of your video for Honor Song, and the visuals kind of speak to a bit of my next question. And before the break, we were talking about your speech at the Junos and the way that they didn't recognize Indigenous artists. But you also took aim that night at the Trudeau government, saying a nation-to-nation relationship does not look like pipelines. It does not look like sending militarized police forces into unceded territory. You mentioned the ongoing boil water advisories. Why did you want to speak up that night?
I mean, the fact that anyone is doing anything else at this point confuses me. Use your platform. You have a platform. Speak truth to power. For me, all those things that I sort of outlined, those are unacceptable. Those are unacceptable. It's 2019 and we still don't have communities with clean drinking water in this country. Canada, one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. It's, for me to hold this position right now that I have and a platform and not to say something, no. This is not how, our matriarchs raised me. And I have to, every time I sit in that space, I have to go and honor that. Because I don't get the privilege of just going and being like another artist there. I have a whole, often a community of people behind me who are dealing with human rights abuses. Mm-hmm. So am I to just go up and thank my manager? No, I can't do that.
Was this a conscious decision for you, knowing that, okay, look, now I do have a platform, and like you say, some people don't choose not to use that platform for whatever reason. Is that, you knew you wanted to? I
mean, in terms of writing, I don't write speeches. I don't make a plan of what I'm going to say. But, I mean, these were things on my mind, right, at that time. So thinking about Wolastoqiyik in the West Coast, those images of those militarized police going in and arresting grandmothers, that was very fresh. Boiled water advisories, this is something that has been plaguing this country for a very long time. And it's really it's an infrastructure problem, and one that's quite easy to fix, in my mind. We can't even get in the door at those debates. They want us to hold their microphones. So I just think we need to be doing a little better in 2019. And if I can take my space to challenge people, that's okay. I'll do it. I might not get booked in Alberta, but that's okay. I don't mind.
You're talking about, though, that people are listening, and of course you're a defender of LGBTQ2S rights as well, and how important, that people are listening, that people are watching. How important do you think that is for Indigenous youth out there to have somebody with that voice speaking up?
Well, it's something that I didn't really have, as a young person in the media landscape growing up. Having somebody who was both Indigenous and queer. So for me, that's a very important space to take up.
Yeah.
And, just to let young people know that if you are experiencing homophobia or transphobia in your community, that is not us. All of those lessons that were learned from that Christian church, those were coming from outside. And so our way of understanding, and I don't want to speak too broadly. Of course, there's many, many different understandings, coast to coast, around who Two-Spirit people are and where their place is in the community. But broadly speaking, these were identities that were fully integrated and accepted into community life. And so it is in my mind that we need to get back to this place where everybody's gifts are welcomed and honored. And not some people are better than others and you're going to hell. No, none of that. There's room in the circle for everyone. Mm-hmm. So for me, I just want to go and I want to take that space. And it comes out in what I wear too, So showing that, showing queerness and showing Two-Spirit what that can even look like, is important for me to take and to inspire other young queer Indigenous people to step into their power and know that they are of value in their community inherently.
Well, that's a great place to leave this discussion right now while we step aside for one more break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Jeremy Dutcher. Guest this week is award-winning artist Jeremy Dutcher. What role do you think that the music has to play in reconciliation, or does it have it?
What's reconciliation? I'm still scratching my head for that. Mm-hmm. I think what music is telling stories, and what I think brings people together is hearing our stories from across, right?
Yeah.
So we can see each other, so we can empathize with each other, we can understand each other's experience. That, for me, is what music can do. Because for a long time in this country, we haven't been listening to certain kinds of stories because they come from certain communities. And I think the time for that is done. And so the more diverse voices that we can get at the table telling stories, the more we expand our consciousness around what stories feel like us. And then when we walk down the street, maybe we're not going to other people so quickly because we've seen a movie or we've gone to a show. So really, I really try not to speak on this business of reconciliation too much. That is not our work to do. I'm reconciled in who I am. This is the work of non-Indigenous Canadians to do. And they're happy to do it, I hope.
But I want to know, you're talking about those stories and those voices, and who were the stories and the voices for you that brought you to where you are today in terms of your music?
I mean, the list is truly endless of all the beautiful people that have touched my life and put me where I am. I will say that my Wolastoqiyik community is something that grounds me and keeps me strong. My matriarchs, my mother, Maggie Paul, who told me about these cylinders and put me on this path to do this research. People like Buffy St. Marie, getting to see her artistic vision in the world allowed me as a kid to think that it was possible. To see her and know that our people could hold that space. And not only hold that space, but be a revolutionary within that space. She was talking about genocide in the 60s. Some of her music, like the album Illuminations, which if you haven't heard, go check it out. It is one of the first uses of synthesizer ever. She revolutionized music. And so for me, as a young Indigenous person, to sit there at her feet and say, and dream of the possibility, those are the people that led my way. And I was a lot of hard work too.
Yeah.
But mostly, but mostly Indigenous women that put me where I am.
You know, many would say you've also perhaps created a new genre, and that you're inspiring Indigenous youth today as well. What's your advice to those youth out there who are looking for a career in music or in doing this? What advice do you have for them?
If it's a career that you want out of it,
career was maybe the wrong word.
Do something else.
Yeah, that was maybe the wrong word.
If it's all you can do, if it's all you can dream about, if it's all you can think about, if it's all you can talk about, you have to do it. Because what you create will change this country for the better.
Good words to end on, Jeremy, and we really appreciate you sharing your voice with us here today on Face to Face. Really do appreciate it.
Nice.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we do have, although you're welcome back anytime. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. This show and past episodes are available as podcasts, and you can find those at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.